Hello, my name is Stefano Wood, and this is my partner Dane Helt. And today we will be talking about how do explosions work.
In general, an explosive has four basic characteristics. It is a chemical compound or mixture ignited by heat, shock, impact, friction, or a combination of these conditions. Upon ignition, it decomposes rapidly in a detonation. There is a rapid release of heat and large quantities of high pressure gases that expand rapidly with sufficient force to overcome confining forces. The energy released by the detonation of explosive produces four basic effects: rock fragmentation, rock displacement, ground vibration, and air blast.
And then now I'm going to talk about combustion. Combustion spreads from the ignition source to the adjacent layers of gas mixture. In turn, each point of the burning layer serves as an ignition source for the next adjacent layer. And now we will address the question of our experiment.
For our experiment, our main focus was how does the amount of fuel used affect the force of combustion?
So, the purpose of our experiment is to see how the more fuel you add creates greater combustion. We wanted to see how an explosive force can be greater depending on the amount of fuel we use when firing our potato launcher. The fuel we used was hairspray, and the vessel we used to test this was our potato launcher. We want to know how you can get greater amount of distance with greater force using the more amount of hairspray.
For our procedure, we began with constructing a potato launcher. We used the WikiHow to build a DIY potato cannon. After constructing, create the projectile by taking four Nerf rival balls and duct taping them together in a pyramid shape. Next, place the projectile in the long end of the barrel and jam down using a dowel or another long slim rod until it reaches the end of the tube. Wear safety goggles for protection, unscrew the back cap of the launcher, and fill with hairspray for a set amount of time. Then seal immediately. The potato launcher is now live and point in a safe direction with plenty of room and pull the trigger. The cannon will fire the projectile. After, measure the distance from the launch site to the projectile. Repeat the firing process 10 times for each amount of seconds of hairspray. The variables that need controlling is the angle of the cannon when firing. Make sure it is the same angle for all shots, as well as the projectile used needing to be the same.
Thank you. So here's the overview of the materials we used. You can pause the video if you want to see all the materials we used. So this is a graph of all our data. So when testing this experiment, we had the hairspray was used for it was used in intervals of 1 second, 3 second, and 5 second. And the number below is the distance in yards for each test. So as you can see, we tested each amount of seconds of hairspray 10 times, and those are the varying distances we got in yards. And then this is a different graph showing that obviously the more amount of hairspray gives it more distance, with the 5 seconds having an average peak much higher than the 3 seconds and the 1 second. So this is a list of our flammable chemicals in the hairspray we use, which is dimethyl ether, SD alcohol 40B, vinyl neodecanoate copolymer, and cyclohexylamine. And these are the chemicals that are very flammable and this causes the ignition and the combustion force to be created.
To conclude, in our experiment, we found that having more fuel inside of the launcher before igniting and firing the object, you will have a greater distance. The reason for this is the lighting of the fuel makes a combustion that pushes the projectile out of the cannon. Therefore, if you have more fuel, the greater the combustion, making the force upon the projectile greater. Some factors that we think affected the data was wind, weather, and other environmental factors. We first think that wind can have a factor because it can push the projectile farther or can hinder it by giving it resistance, making it go less distance. We think that the weather can affect the data because if it was colder, then it might not go as far than if it was hotter a certain day. To get better data, we think we could have been inside a big indoor complex to make those outside environmental factors disappear. There would be less deviation between certain data points. Something we could have done better as a group is instead of doing seconds sprayed for amount of fuel, we could get a more precise amount by measuring it out. Finally, our experiment showed us how greater amount of fuel for ignition can affect the amount of combustion force when firing a cannon.
Thank you. And this is a website QR code to our website with full, much more in-depth information on our experiment. And it will actually have a live demonstration video on there. Thank you.
Barely